Welcome to Section 2, Gateway and Trunk Connections. In the prior section, we saw how the small business can take advantage of the ATA appliance by providing basic SIP service. In this video, we're going to supplement that. We have to know a little bit more about SIP. So in this section, we're going to take a look at SIP connections and configurations, SIP pricing models, we'll look at support for fax for the SPA 122, and how to implement Google Voice. And we're going to look at support for fax for the SPA 122 and implementing Google Voice as a very simple voice solution for a small business. Let's go ahead and get started with SIP connections and considerations. In this video, we're going to look at connections and consideration options for SIP providers. We're going to look at account routing options, account restrictions, and voicemail options for SIP providers. Let's get started here and take a look at the command prompt and pick out a VoIP solution or a SIP provider. I'm going to go ahead and open up a browser and we're going to do a search on SIP providers. Here you're going to find hundreds if not thousands of SIP providers. So what you can do is open up your favorite web browser and we're going to take a look at some SIP providers. We can do an internet search to look for the best providers for SIP trunks. I'm using VoIP.ms just for this example, because of the features it provides for the demonstration. Let's say we want to find a SIP provider. Let's just go to our favorite internet search engine and look at SIP providers for our region. Worldwide providers can be located in any country of the world, and you're probably going to want to find a provider located locally because SIP is subjective to delays and latency, and you don't want to provide your voice service over a long distance. If you have a delay in that service, it's going to affect your company infrastructure. So I'm going to provide lists for you. We can just go to Google, or we can go to Bing, let's say, and just type in SIP providers. And typically you want to do it in region. Here you'll see a list of SIP providers. Some websites maintain better lists than others, in which case you can use those lists and provide for pricing and feature comparison. I'm going to choose a VoIP.ms. So VoIP.ms is a good site for demonstration reasons because it's relatively intuitive to the user. The way it's structured, the way the pricing tiers are, I think it's pretty upfront about everything. I've used other providers and also had equal success with those. For this demonstration, I think VoIP.ms will do just fantastically. So I actually have a VoIP.ms device registered right now, and I have an account with VoIP.ms, and I have some money provided for that account. What we're going to take a look at is some of those SIP considerations, and one of those being the time it takes to send traffic to that provider. So with VoIP.ms, one of the things that we can do is we can try to issue a ping to that site to see the expected response time for that. Keep in mind that we're pinging the web browser in this case. We're not actually pinging the SIP provider, but you could probably expect similar results because the systems are typically hosted locally to that web server. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a command prompt and just ping VoIP.ms to look at the response time for VoIP.ms. I go to my Windows and I type in command, and what I'm going to do is open up a command prompt as you see here. On the command prompt then, let's go ahead and type in ping and your service provider name, VoIP.ms. And we're going to look at the response time for this. And so we have received packets. We have an average of 32 millisecond response, which is very good. It's within the acceptable range for this. So I'm going to go ahead and type in exit on that. I just did a quick test with this. Let's go through the menu and features of our VoIP provider. First off, you'll have to create a username and password for your VoIP service. And this is something that should be kept secret because if someone were to get a hold of that username and password, they could potentially log in as you and use your VoIP service, and that's not a very good thing. What you'll find with VoIP is that the only thing you'll need to access is your username and password, because every site publishes their server information. If a user were to gain access to those credentials, there's that potential for misuse. So we want to protect that. We can see our current balance, and this is one of the things when you're shifting your services from like a local PBX to a SIP provider, You're going to have to manage the account funding for that because things like your faxes, your VoIP calls will all be going to that SIP provider. So one of the things you can look at into trying to track expenses is setting alerts for your pricing model so that sometimes the providers and customers set up warnings in the event that some employee might use international calling and then, in a sense, use up all their balance. So this way you can get set up alerts to be notified when your balance reaches a particular threshold. That's very important is pricing management of your SIP provider, because remember, one of the reasons why you're transitioning to the SIP provider is for flexibility, but also a cost reduction. So you can provide your business toll-free numbers, 911 capabilities in the US. That would be like an E911 Phase 2 enhancements, and which includes basically location services for emergency calls. That's typically an enhanced pricing structure, but as a business, you're going to want to take that into consideration because of liability. In the event of emergency, you want to ensure that employees can contact emergency services and actually have the emergency service find the location of that person that is in trouble or needs assistance. One of the things in the United States is that's called E911 Phase 2, and that's the idea of location services. So if you want emergency services, that's also in addition to your regular SIP cost. Other things to take into account is the use of international calls. Obviously, long distance, because it's SIP-based, really doesn't take into account local toll or long distance. It really allows you to call, particularly within your continent, for free. If you want to call between country codes, then it's also an additional expense. If you're going to have a phone system that is beyond fax service, you're going to want to set up a voicemail system and also provide for caller ID. And some SIP providers allow you to change that caller ID number to reflect like your main business number. So if you're calling from an extension, it would actually reflect your main business number. Music on hold is one of those options, or you can provision through the SIP provider or your own services. The direct inward dialing number is the protocol that you want to support for that. So some options can be found for adjusting your direct inward dial number protocol. And device type, I'm going to support in this case is an ATA device, an IP phone or soft phone, and it's going to allow us to configure those items at a later time. Basically what I'm concerned about is my account number, the server that I'm going to, and my account password at this time. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other options with this setup here. So I'm going to go to the main menu, and you can go to the portal home. That's what you're going to see here. And it's been a while, so my user ID is my email here. And on the main menu, I'm going to go to the account settings, or account information in this case, whatever you want to set it to. So the routing options for SIP providers is up to the user how they want to provision this. So in Canada, I can provide for routing in this case. I can provide for Canada routing for calls if I want to have business with people in Canada. As you can see here, you also have options for international routing. I want to provide for premium services, toll-free routing, and toll-free termination. And this is if you want to set up 800 numbers for your business so that customers can call in without incurring a charge. Okay, let's go to account restrictions. In account restrictions, you could allow your users to dial information, or that's 411 dialing. Allow users to dial international calls. You'll see here max call time for those international calls. And you can set this to keep costs down. Remember that international calls will incur an additional fee for that SIP provider. In many cases, this is by the minute call. So currently I have set up to call countries of Canada toll-free and United States, but I can also change that. The E911 is the enhanced 911 caller ID, and if I were to select this, I would have an additional charge. I basically set up this account for the video so you can see what a SIP provider looks like, and I'm going to tear down this account probably once the videos are over because I'm going to return it to the business mode. The dialing mode in this case, because I'm established in North America, I'm using the North American numbering plan. The caller ID, once I add that, I can add 10-digit number. But in some cases, that incurs additional fee. Again, you're going to want to check the status on that if you want to do that or not, and what the fee is for your provider. Voicemail access, if I have this linked to a small business device or router, I can provide for voicemail through that device or a separate service. And music on hold, I could obviously provision that. All right, so disable the password display typically in the customer portal. That's typically a safe thing to do if you're managing the web browser and you have people around you that might observe that password. Again, once they know that username and password, it's very easy for them to create their own SIP phone from many devices, even from iPads or tablets or computers. Once you have those SIP credentials, you can enable SIP devices from any of those devices. I have one on my iPad, so when my phone rings, my iPad also rings as well. Portal password can be changed. Obviously, this is something you want to make very strong. When you go to use it, it's easy to copy and paste that into your provision systems. And then for an IP guard can manage addresses that it does not recognize for your home network. You would add this to manage your credentials for your business and restrict the use of IP addresses from managing your content settings for your VoIP provider. Security is a very big consideration for SIP calls because you remember that your SIP traffic is in-band traffic, which means it's often used in conjunction with other data traffic, whether it be scavenger class, work-related traffic, email traffic. Your SIP traffic is going and traveling over those same internet links typically. You can get a dedicated link for your SIP provider, in which case increases security, but may give you a false sense of security. With that being the only provider, it's still vulnerable to many types of attacks, and you have to learn how to provision that and secure that. In this case, our software is managing our security for a SIP provider in our SPA 122. So a protocol for direct inward dialing numbers, I'm going to allow that to be a SIP protocol for that device type. I don't need to specify it, but sometimes if you specify your device type, it gives you a quick configuration for that type of device. One I think is very important is the idea that you can get notified in the event that certain circumstances or characteristics occur. And I would relate this to SIP security notifications, because if your account runs below a certain balance, it can terminate your voice traffic for your SIP provider. So I don't have to read all these to you, but these are all separate notifications, which I like to see. You'll see an email option there where they can email you. And a lot of people have their email maybe tied to a particular work email that they would get notified when they have an inbound message, in particular one like this. So in this case, my direct inward dialing number, it's chosen by the location that I'm servicing. So in this case, let's say I'm doing the video from around the Chicago area. I'm going to want to choose the Chicago server because I'm going to get the best response time. SIP providers are nationwide or globally even, and you're going to have a SIP location nearest you. That would be the best option. Remember that SIP is very sensitive to latency, and so you don't want excessive time for traversal of those packets. In this case, I'm going to pay per minute on the inbound. If I want to do a caller ID name lookup, they do charge per call. And so I'm going to say no thanks to that just for the demonstration. But you can see how the account can add up in costs. Many providers can vary. Some give you a more basic and more robust service plan. This is a fantastic service for you to try it out and see what you're doing. I'm not working for VoIP.ms. I'm not related to this in any way. I'm just using this site as an example to use. All right, for routing, I'm going to use SIP on a main account. Under advanced options, you can see that we can allow for NAT. I'm going to say yes, I'm going to allow for NAT traversal. That might use a stun server or a session traversal through NAT. DTMF tones are dual tone multi-frequency for those phones, and sometimes if you have older devices, I'm not saying you have a rotary phone, those are really dated, but the typically phones allow those DTMF tones. I'm going to set that to auto. And codecs, I'm going to go ahead and allow many codecs. The G729 and G711 are acceptable codecs used by many devices, and you can disallow some if you don't want to support them. And the reason you may not want to support them is that their quality would suffer, or you just don't support those protocols. Okay, so we took a look at some basic settings of our VoIP provider. We looked at everything from account routing to security options with this, and you'll notice that the pricing tier changes with those types of calls.